Now, HS2 is not just billions over budget, it's a nightmare. That's according to the former Chancellor and former high-speed rail enthusiast, Alistair Darling. He helped to approve the HS2 rail link when he was in government. But now he says it could have catastrophic consequences, starving other big housing and transport projects of much-needed cash. With costs now estimated at more than £40 billion, opposition to the whole scheme is fast gaining ground. Well, here's our business correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy.
The Ryle family have lived on this lane in a leafy suburb west of London for over a century. They've spent the past decade rebuilding the house, but last November, just as the project was coming to an end, Mr. Ryle was told the house would have to be demolished to make way for the high-speed 2 train. So how did you feel when they told you that the train would go right through your house?
Well, just unbelievable, couldn't believe it. Just, you know, it was like somebody, well, anybody, you know, they would, how would they feel? They're going through it's not a house, it's my home. I've lived in this lane all my life, my family before me, my grandfather before, over 100 years, and they're going to just devastate the whole lot of it.
It's not just his house, he'll also lose his car repair business at the end of the lane. And they're not the only ones affected. Round the corner is a busy outdoor activity centre. From the old house, the high-speed train will then cut through these woods behind me and emerge here on this picturesque lake, where thousands of kids come every year to learn to sail, to have fun on the water. But the manager here has been told that all this, within a couple of years, will be no more, as the high-speed train hurtles at 220 miles an hour across this lake.
It's crazy. I mean, we've established this place over the last 30 years. It's a mecca for local kids, people from West London, heavily used. Out of the blue comes the idea that high-speed train's going to go right over the top of us, through the lake, through all the buildings, and it will be no more, nowhere for children to go. So it's a disaster.
Some politicians think the high-speed line is a disaster too. Today, the former Labour Chancellor, Alistair Darling, withdrew his support for the plan, even though it was he who first approved it. In a Times editorial, he said,
"The facts have changed. The case for HS2 was just about stateable in 2010. I don't believe that it is today."
Mr. Darling's main issue is cost. It was first projected at £30 billion in 2010, but rose to £50 billion in July this year. Earlier this week, it was reported that costs could hit more than £70 billion. Still, the government was emphatic today that high-speed 2 was absolutely vital for Britain, a way of bridging the north-south divide and helping to boost regional economies. Phase 1 will see high-speed trains from London to Birmingham open in 2026, cutting 35 minutes off the current journey. Phase 2 branches to Leeds and Manchester, shaving 50 minutes from the Leeds route, while the trip to Manchester will be an hour quicker. From there, trains will use existing lines to carry passengers to Scotland. Perhaps surprisingly, the Labour Party was also pretty speedy in its rejection of Mr. Darling's views today.
I think it would be easy to go along with people who say, oh, it's too expensive, abandon it. But opponents from all parties who've commented about this never then say how they're going to solve the capacity issue. And that is important. How are we going to solve it if not in this way? And nobody's come up with an answer.
The government insists high-speed 2 is the only answer. And despite the mounting costs and mounting dissent, it seems the fate of picturesque landscapes like this one is still sealed.
Well, I'm joined now from Derby by the Transport Secretary, Patrick McLoughlin. Patrick McLoughlin, are you still convinced this is value for money?
Absolutely, I'm convinced that this is necessary for Britain's long-term future, and yes, it will be value for money.
That's very odd you say that, because your own figures, Department for Transport report, says that phase 1 of the project lies towards the lower end of the medium value for money category. It doesn't sound that brilliant value for money to me.
Well, when you look at BCR and things like that, just remember that the Jubilee line
you're talking about
was
cost-benefit
initially
ratio,
calculated. Yeah, sorry, the benefit cost ratio Sorry, I thought that's what you were referring to. When you look at the benefit cost ratio for the Jubilee line, that was less than 1%. It's well over that for HS2. And what is important about HS2 is, Alistair Darling says the facts have changed. Actually, the facts have not changed. We have seen a huge growth in the amount of people using the railways, from 750 million passenger journeys 20 years ago to 1.5 billion today, and it is still growing. We've seen freight increase on our railways by 60%. I want to see more freight on our railways. The way we do that is actually by increasing the capacity of the railway network,
okay,
and that's a very, very important issue.
OK, but you could increase the capacity at half the cost. Your own figures show that, just by upgrading the existing lines.
Well, we've already upgraded. We've spent £9 billion on the West Coast Main Line, upgrading that north of Rugby, and it doesn't give the capacity that is necessary. At the moment, every day in Euston Station, 4,000 people arrive standing in that station. 5,000 people arrive standing in New Street Station. I want to encourage people to use the train. They deserve and need longer term, better trains.
OK, so if the costs keep on going up, as they have been, just in June the Chancellor added another £8 billion to the estimated costs, is there a point at which you say enough is enough, we're going to have to pull the plug?
Well, I don't want to see the costs going up. What I announced when I announced to Parliament,
would you have to pull the plug?
Well, let me just deal with the figures, because what is very important, we have seen some very big infrastructure projects in this country. Crossrail at the moment is being built in London. £14.5 billion. It's on time and it's below budget. It is very important to set the right budgets. And what I set when I gave the figures to Parliament was a contingency of £14 billion included in that money, so that when people ask us to do things, as they have done, because you've talked about the environmental issues, and I'm very keen to make sure we address environmental issues and concerns. We can look at tunnelling in some areas, and we can look at alleviating some of those environmental problems.
Okay,
so that is why that budget has been set.
But you quote one set of figures at me. Let me quote another to you. HS1, £1 billion cost when first proposed. It eventually cost £11 billion. I ask again, if the costs keep going up, will you at some point pull the plug, no matter how much you regret doing so?
Well, I think we've learnt a lot about building big infrastructure projects. I've just talked about Crossrail. Crossrail budget was set, £14.9 billion. It's being done now. It's under budget, and it will be delivered on time.
So
costs are very important. I am determined to see that the costs that I have announced to Parliament, actually, those are the costs which we've got to build this line to.
But the reality is, isn't it, that too much political capital has been expended now. It's impossible to stop it. If there's a few billion added on here or there, you've got to kind of go with it, haven't you?
Well, we'll also want to look at getting investment. It will be possible that some of the stations, we may be able to attract a private investment into some of those station locations. So, and then, you know, once it's built, it is how you then further develop the line after that.
But if there's hundreds of millions, if not £1 billion more added to that bill, I just ask one more time, do you pull the plug if the cost goes up?
We have set the budget. It has to be delivered in that budget.
So any more money, you pull the plug?
Well, we've set the budget. I very much believe with the contingency we've allowed, a £14 billion contingency, it will be possible to build it within that budget I've set.
Patrick McLoughlin, thank you very much for joining me.